the Phantom Killer, Jack the Ripper, the Freeway Phantom, West Mesa Murders, and the Zodiac Killer are all serial killers that were never caught. It's unfortunate, but they all covered their tracks really well. Even when the Zodiac would taunt the police, he was never discovered. Or she. This cannot be said about all serial killers. And one of those that bumbled his way all the way through his crimes and into a jail cell is Dennis Rader, the man who called himself BTK. Hello, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time, then thank you for being here. And if you're returning, so happy to see you again. I'm Sean, and each week I try to research and tell you some true crime story. I have some exciting news coming out soon, so I will keep you posted, and I'm trying to figure out the logistics of it. I'm going to be breaking the 1,000 subscriber limit right now, and that's what I've been trying for a while. If you're not subscribed, please do so. I really love the subscriptions. I love interacting with the people that are here. It helps me do better. So, thank you, and let's get on with our story. This is the story of Dennis Rader. I want to start off by saying that some of the things that I'm going to talk about could cause triggers. It contains murder, sexual perversions, child death, impure thoughts, and possibly disturbing imagery. I'm not showing any of the gruesome pictures because of, well, morals and YouTube guidelines. And I'm not gonna, let's just get on with it. Because a lot of the pictures that were taken were by Rader himself, and they're disturbing. I mean, they're online. If you really are curious and want to see them, they are online, but they are so freaking disturbing. This guy is a psycho, and yeah. So, to start off, Rader was born March 9th of 1945 in Kansas. As a child, he led a normal life. He tended to blend in with the crowd. Some would say that he had no sense of humor, and when he entered college in 1965, he started to experiment with breaking and entering homes and stealing things. It became his passion, which would play out later on in his later years. He joined the Air Force from 1966 to 1970. While stationed in Korea, he started to have relations with local prostitutes. That's how he lost his virginity. He wanted to learn from a pro, he said. He also continued honing his skills on breaking and entering. After the Air Force, he moved back to Kansas, and that's where he met Paula Dietz, I think that's how you said his last name, with whom he married in May 22nd of 1971. They moved to Park City, just north of Wichita, and he was working for Cessna. When he lost his job in 1973, things started to grow inside of him. Urges, fantasies. What would it be like to kill somebody is what he was pondering. And it really didn't take him long to find out. On January 15th of 1974, he decided to make his move on the Otero family. Rader had plans he had a plan, and he gathered himself a hit kit. In the kit were things like guns, knives, cords, multiple tools to assist him in breaking and entering into a home. Um, he took the knife, he cut the phone lines in the backyard, and then he broke into the home. He was only expecting to see Julie Otero, who was 35, and her two children, Josephine, 11, and Joseph Jr., 9. He was not expecting Joseph Sr., 38, to be home, but he was home because he hurt his ribs. He used the ruse that he was a wanted criminal and only wanted to get some food and money and a car, and he said he wouldn't hurt them. This was a lie. He forced them into the bedroom where he tied their hands and feet together. He then proceeded to strangle Julie until she stopped moving. Next, he moved to Joseph Sr. and put a plastic bag over his head and secured it with a cord. He didn't realize, though, that Joseph would start chewing through that bag, so he had to improvise. He ended up doing the same thing with the son, but this time he used like a bag and a t-shirt and stuff like that to try to stop the inevitable. According to Rader, this is when Julie woke up. She started yelling at him. She said something like, "Hope Jesus, you better get right with Jesus," or something like that, and he decided to strangle her to make sure she was dead. He made sure that everyone was deceased except for Josephine, who he took down into the basement. Trigger warning. He hung her from a pipe, and she was partially dressed, basically just in a sweater. According to Rader, this is when he had sexual fulfillment, and he left that sample of that fulfillment on the ground. He didn't touch the girl, but yeah, it's still disturbing. He then turned around and tidied up the house. He took some souvenirs for himself, and he also drank some water and then cleaned the glass. Later on, he stated that this was his signature, that he was going to drink a glass of water, clean it, and then put it away, because that's his little secret. He rose the temperature of the house before leaving just to try to hide the time of death, and then he left. Now, after he left, this is where bumbling Rader comes in. He completely forgot about his knife. He left that in the backyard where he cut the phone lines, so he had to return back to the house and pick up that knife to not leave that as evidence, even though he left fingerprints and all this other stuff all over the house. But eventually the bodies were discovered in the afternoon when the three older children came home from school. Charlie was 15, Danny was 14, and Carmen was 13. Danny and Carmen both thought that their parents were playing jokes on them, and called the chair, screamed down for Charlie. Charlie got there and realized that it wasn't a joke, and he tried to free them and tried to call the police or an ambulance or somebody, but realized that the phones were cut. He had to go next door to call for help. They did not know about their little brother, Joseph Jr., or Josephine being down in the basement. They were not discovered till the police showed up and cleared the house. So yeah, basically he left three younger kids orphaned. What a great guy. He enjoyed breaking and entering into homes, but this was a new level of joy for him. He would stalk the women that caught his eye. He called this trolling. He loved to troll for people. He would make them his projects. He called everything that he is doing a project. And then he would also take items from the people and he would put them in his hidey holes. And he had hidey holes all over his house, his parents' house. Um, Anywhere that he could have a hidey hole, he had a hidey hole with memorabilia from the houses. He realized that the first time was a little overwhelming to him. With 4 people, he wanted to make the next one a little easier. So he focused on Catherine Bright, who was 21, and picked April 4th, 1974, to kill her. He called this Project Lights Out. On that day, he broke into her home and waited in her bedroom. Eventually, he heard her return home around 2 p.m., but she had returned with her brother Kevin, who was 19. He wasn't expecting this. He stuck to his plan, though, telling them that he was a wanted criminal and needed food, money, and a car. He moved them to the bedroom and had Kevin tie his sister's hands and feet. He then had Kevin go into another room and he attempted to tie Kevin up, but Kevin fought back. Kevin tried to get the gun from him, but in the process was shot in the head, in the side of the head. Now, Rader says that Kevin did take the gun from the second gun from his shoulder, and Rader said that he pointed the gun at him, and Rader stuck his finger in the muzzle, which jammed the gun. It's unknown if this really happened or if it's just all up in his head. But Kevin continued to fight to get the gun, but Rader shot him again in the mouth. Kevin fell to the ground and appeared to be dead or dying on the floor. Rader, for good measure, kicked him a couple times just to make sure. So he went back to the bedroom. Now, I have read a couple different reports. One that this part took place between the 2 Kevin shootings, and this part took place after both the Kevin shootings. So the timeline is a little skewed depending on what article you read. So he went there to strangle her, but she broke free and she fought him. He said that she fought like a hellcat. He realized that strangling her would not work, so he stabbed her multiple times in the abdomen and back, 11 to be exact. This is when he heard the front door open. Kevin had gotten back up and he ran out the door. So Kevin, 2 bullet holes in his head, still got up and ran. Kevin ran 4 or 5 blocks to his car at the Wichita State University to go get help. Well, Rader went to check on Kevin and realized that he was gone. And he quickly decided to clean up. He took some items. He tried to steal Catherine's truck, but couldn't get it started. So he ended up having to walk a couple blocks covered in Catherine's blood. So yet another bumbling mistake that he did. I mean, this is broad daylight. Anyone could have saw him. So he went home and cleaned up before his wife got home from work. Catherine was a tough lady, though. I mean, she fought him and clinged to life. She was still alive in her bedroom. She crawled her way from her bedroom to the living room and called the police. I don't know why he didn't cut the phone lines this time, but he didn't at this house. She stated that she did not know who did this. When police showed up, she was speaking a little bit, saying, where she was stabbed. And they had an ambulance pick her up and take her to the hospital. And after multiple surgeries and blood transfusions, she still died. Kevin, on the other hand, he survived, but he had no idea who Rader was. So he could not give, he gave a description, but he knew nothing else. Coincidentally, though, both Catherine and Julie Otero, worked at the same place and actually worked on the same assembly line. So chances are they probably knew each other. I don't think he knew this. It was just a coincidence. Rader took a break from killing or stalking or anything like that until 1977. He needed to take a break. I mean, Kevin saw his face, so he wanted to conceal himself a little bit. He called the Wichita Eagle newspaper, and he claimed to have killed the Otero family, and that he left a letter in the public library in a mechanical engineering book. He did this because 3 other people were in custody for the murders, and he did not want them to get credit. Even though he was an educated man, he had terrible spelling and grammar in his letters. I could not find a good copy of the letters to show you, but I'm going to read you a little bit of the letter just so you see the crazy talk. I can't stop it, so the monster goes on and hurts me as well as society. Maybe you can stop it. I can't. He has already chosen his next victim or victims. Since sex criminals do not change their MOs by nature, cannot do it. I will not change mine. The code word for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK. He named himself. You know, most of the other serial killers in the world that have, like the Boston Strangler and Son of Sam, things like that, the media names them, but Rader was so narcissistic and so stupid. He goes, hey, why don't you call me this? There's one letter, and I couldn't find it, but he threw out a whole bunch of suggestions of, why don't you call me this, or this, or this, or this? But he stuck with BTK. He was fascinated by killers like Zodiac and wanted to taunt the police and the press. He wanted the publicity, but at the moment he was only getting local attention. He wanted to make sure that the world noticed him. But after his mess up with letting Kevin escape, he needed to lay low. He knew they would be looking for him, so he just needed to subside for a while. So like I said, 3 years is all he could wait. And it was 1977. He met a woman named Cheryl. But when he broke into the home, she was not home. So eventually he just left. And then while he was, after he left there, he was walking down Hydraulic Street when he saw a 5-year-old boy. He used a picture of his wife, asked the boy, hey, have you seen her around? And the kid said no. So he sat there and watched the boy for a little bit and watched where the kid went home to. Then a little later in the day, he posed as a detective to get into the house. There were 3 kids in the home with the mother, Shirley Vian. She was 24. Rader had closed the blinds and pulled a gun when Shirley came out of one of the rooms. He promised her that he would not hurt the kids, but ordered them to go into the bathroom and then locked the door. He told Shirley that he wanted to have his way with her and, had to calm her down. The kids were screaming in the bathroom, and this made him rush and was very nervous. He tied her up and strangled her with the cord. He left an ejaculate on her panties this time. He called sexual gratification the Big G, and his torture of people Big Sparky time. Yeah, Big Sparky time. Not all there, bumbling fool. He had plans on killing the kids because them screaming and everything kind of ruined his whole fantasy, and he was going to kill the kids. And this is from what he said. But then a phone started ringing, and he decided to leave early. He just left the kids in the bathroom, screaming with their mother partially undressed, tied up, and dead in the next room. He had to go again. It was starting to become his obsession, and by December of '77, he was stalking his new project. He called this project Project Fox Hunt. Her name was Nancy Fox. She was 22. On December 8th, he decided to make his move. He went to her duplex and cut her phone lines. He broke into the house and confronted her in the kitchen. He had a gun. He told her that he had sexual issues and needed to have sex with her. He told her that he needed to tie her up, and he told her that he would not kill her. She complied, undressed, and allowed herself to be tied up. He then undressed also, and then she said something about wanting him to hurry up so then she could just call the police. Now, in his own words, he said that whether he was going to kill her or not, her making that comment clinched the killing part of it. It just pissed him off because it's like, I don't know, he planned on killing her anyway. I mean, he says that he might not have, but her saying that he chose to do it. He started to strangle her, and right before she passed out, he let go and whispered into her ear that he's done this before and that she was not his first. Then he started choking her again and whispered again right before she passed out that he was BTK. And then she died. Her nightgown was found on her or next to her body with ejaculate again. But since she lived alone, no one noticed. So he had left. He did all his stuff, stole stuff, drank his water, tidied up the place. But the next day, he was like, wait, she lives alone. No one's going to discover her. So he actually went to a payphone on his lunch hour and called the police. He told them that she was dead and what the address was. And then he left the phone dangling. So, they could trace the phone call back to this payphone, and they got his prints and stuff like that. I mean, they already had his prints from other things, but he's just an idiot. In the early part of 1978, he wrote a poem to the Wichita Eagle, and then he sent them a serious letter. In that letter, he took responsibilities for the past 7 killings. He also talked about the X factor, or the factor X, which was his reason for doing these killings. The next letter that he sent to them was a poem to Nancy called "Oh Death to Nancy." It was in the style of the old folk song "Oh Death," which I just absolutely hate that he wrote this poem to such a good song. Oh. This was the time that the Wichita police decided to make it public that there was an unknown serial killer in the town, and for the citizens to be careful and to look after each other and to lock their doors. They also encouraged the citizens to check their phone lines when they returned home to make sure that there was a dial tone. In June of 78, Paula gave birth to her and Rader's their second kid, daughter. He laid low for a little bit, and in April of 1979, he broke into a home. The home belonged to Anna Williams, a 63-year-old widow. He waited and waited, but she never showed up, and he left really frustrated. In June, he sent her a package. In this package was a poem entitled, "Oh Anna, Why Didn't You Appear?" There was a drawing of what he intended to do to her and a few items that he had stolen from her house. He also sent a similar package to the TV station KAKE, Cake TV, in Wichita. Anna was so scared by this, she immediately moved out of Wichita, far, far away. Smart woman. Very smart. The 80s came and BTK went dormant. But Rader did anything but. He continued to troll and became active in the church and also the Scouts, which his son was a member of. He became a Scout leader. Ugh. He was a busy family man, and everyone knew it. In 1985, he turned 40. His son was 9, his daughter was 6, and he was ready to wake BTK up again. And his next victim was right around the corner. This was Project Cookie. She was Marion Hedge, a 53-year-old widow who coincidentally was right around the corner. She was a neighbor of the Raiders. She was always friendly to him. She would wave and say hello. He plotted the date to be April 27th, 1985. He was in the middle of a Boy Scout meeting, and he said that he needed to leave because he had a really bad headache and he needed to go get medicine. Then he went, this is where it gets weird. Well, so far. Then he went to a bowling alley. This is where he got a beer. He swished some around his mouth, poured some on himself to make others believe that he had been drinking. He called a cab, and the cab picked him up. He had the cab drop him off near Maureen's home. Once there, he saw her car and thought she was home, so he did the usual. He cut the phone lines, broke into the house. Once inside, he found she wasn't home. He waited around and heard her come home and looked out the window and saw she was with a man. Well, he went and hid in a closet. They sat in the front room and communicated for a while, and he just sat in the closet. Well, after the guy left, she went to bed, and around 1 in the morning, he finally decided to exit the closet. He turned on the light, I think it's the light next to her bed, which startled her, and she jumped up and started screaming. He jumped on top of her and choked her to death. So this was another thing against to what he normally does. He's just all over the place. He's bumbling. With her deceased, he dragged her out to a car and placed her in the trunk. He then drove to the church that he went to, that he was a trusted churchgoer, that he actually had a key for the church, so he let himself in. He took her body to the basement and took pictures of her in different poses. He said he wouldn't have dared do that on the altar because that would have been sacrilegious. When he was done taking the pictures, he put her back in the back of the car and dropped her body off outside of town in a ditch. She was not found until May 5th. And of course, they never attributed this to Rader or to BTK. But Rader kept trolling. And then he found his next victim, Vicky Wagerl. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. She was 28 years old. This was September of 1986. He used to walk by her house and he heard her playing the piano. This caught his attention, and of course he named his project Project Piano, because he's original. She was a quiet, peaceful woman, and a mother of two, and a wife who volunteered at church. This time Rader would dress up as a telephone repairman and tried using that to enter the home around 10 a.m. She let him in, and once inside he pulled out a gun on her. He forced her into the bedroom. He tied her up, but she broke loose. She fought him hard, yelling as she did. And she knew the windows were wide open and was hoping that somebody would hear her screams. And the dogs outside were barking. It was a giant fiasco. Rader said that she fought harder than any other person had in all of his killings. She scratched him on the face and neck, and he took nylon stockings and strangled her with it. She prayed as he did this, and she had been claiming that her husband was on his way home. Rader rushed to leave and grabbed a few souvenirs. He also grabbed the keys to her car and took off in her car. Vicky's husband, Bill, was on his way home when he passed or met Rader in the road. He thought that was his wife's car and was not totally sure. He didn't see the driver, so he could not give a description. Once home, he found his 2-year-old on the living room floor and his wife deceased in the bedroom. He called 911 and the ambulance took her to the hospital. They worked on her, but they had to pronounce her dead. Soon after they got there, but she had his DNA. I mean, granted, he left semen at a whole bunch of places, but she had his DNA under her fingernails now. This was a little bit before a lot of DNA testing, so they didn't know what they were going to be able to do with it. So they couldn't do any matches, but they saved it. The bad thing is that the police did not tie this to BTK, and Bill ended up being the suspect for her killings. To the police's knowledge, BTK had not killed since 1977. And for the next 18 years, police and public blamed Bill for the death of his wife. He was never charged, but he was shunned a lot. And a lot of people, he lived with this. Near the end of 1987, 3 members of the Frazier family were murdered in Wichita. The father, Philip, and 2 teenage daughters. Bill Butterworth was a contractor for the family and was arrested for using a stolen credit card and the car that he stole from the Fagers. He was acquitted by a jury due to lack of evidence, but the police figured him as the killer. Rader, doing the thing that he does best, trying to get attention, wrote Miss Fager a letter in early 1988, and he addressed it from BTK. He stated that he did not do the crime that killed her husband and daughters, but he admired the man who did. He included a drawing, which I will not include, of what he thought happened to one of the daughters being tied up. Yeah, he's just a work of, piece of something. Also in 1988, he got fired. He looked for different jobs, including a police officer, but they weren't going to take him. They weren't that desperate. He did work for the U.S. Census Bureau, but only for a few months, and it took him all over the place. He wasn't stationed at home. On January 19th of 1991, he committed his last killing. Dolores Davis was a 62-year-old lady who lived alone. In his trolling, she struck his fancy, and he knew he needed another project. He decided to use a scouting trip to cover up the killing. They're camping out. He set up the camp. He parked his car near the Baptist church that he was at. Went to the church, changed his clothes, got his hit kit, and then walked 2 miles to her home. He must have been getting lazy about breaking and entering because he used a concrete block and threw it through her patio door. She came running out of the bedroom. He handcuffed her and told her that he was a wanted man, a ruse that he hadn't used in a while. She begged him not to hurt her, and she said that she had kids. He talked to her a bit and calmed her down. He pretended to be collecting things that he would need and said that he was going to be leaving. He uncuffed her and then tied her up with pantyhose and strangled her to death. He said that this took 2 to 3 minutes for her to die. And of course, that really excited him. He took her out to her car, and placed her in the trunk. He dumped her body under a county bridge, and then he took the car back and took her car back to her house, then walked back to his car 2 miles. The next day, he returned to where she was buried and placed a mask on her and took pictures of her. He also used the mask for himself in pictures that he took. She was not found for 13 days. On February 1st, 1991, he did not take credit of her death until he was caught. Now, something I haven't delved into much is talking about how he would take, clothing, underwear, stuff like that from the women that he killed, and he would wear it and pose in autoerotic asphyxiation poses, strangling himself and things like that, and take pictures of this. And there's a collection of these pictures online that if you really want to see them, go for it. I will not share it because it's disturbing as hell. God, this guy's a freak, a loser, a bumbling fool. So 4 months later, after in 1991, he was hired as a compliance officer for Park City right outside of Wichita. This is a job where he had to make sure citizens complied with city rules like parking violations, animal licenses, mowing, things like that. While working here, he was known as an overzealous and a petty person. Citizens complained about him, and some of them even moved away just to not deal with him. A friend of mine who passed away recently lived in Wichita area and knew him. Once he was caught, her and I talked about it, and she told me, she goes, "Oh yeah, he's a dick. I know him." I really wish I could have done this video when she was still alive, so then she could see it. But she died a month or so ago, so surely this is for you. Rest in peace. There are many different stories and complaints on the internet about him. He cited someone for having the wrong colored garden hose. I didn't realize there was a colored garden hose that you're supposed to have. Another time he caught a person's dog at large, took it right back to the pound, and euthanized it right away, instead of giving the person a chance to reclaim it. There was an employee, Mary Capps, who worked under him and said he was a terrible boss. She stated about how cold and demeaning he was. He even was degrading to her often. She filed weekly complaints, and they were all dismissed or referred back to Rader himself to deal with. She's lucky. She could have been a victim too, and she actually did write a book about how she could have been the 11th victim. Otherwise, Rader stayed quiet. BTK was hiding. But on March 17th, 2004, Rader mailed a letter to the Wichita Eagle under the name Bill Thomas Kilman, BTK. Get it? He was so clever. Such a clever boy. In the letter were photocopies of pictures that he took of Vicky and her driver's license. He also signed it with BTK. Then on May 5th, he sent a letter to KAK TV, which was a word puzzle, all of the Zodiac. Then on June 9th, he left a package taped to a sign in the middle of the city. It had some gruesome description of the Otero murders, along with a sketch of a body hanging from a pipe. On June 17th, 2004, there was another package that was labeled BTK, and this was at the public library. He said that time was running out for him, and he wanted to find the right time for his next hit. On October 22nd, a UPS driver found his next package. It was a collage of children in bindings drawn on a manila envelope. He also autographed it and gave false details about BTK, like when he was born, given a false date of birth, things like that. Rader then became the president of his church, and 8 days later, he placed a special K-box in the back of a truck. On it, he had BTK written. In it, he asked if it was possible for police to trace a floppy disk to where it was, where things were saved on it. And he said that he wanted to show the police evidence to prove that he is the BTK, but he didn't want it to get back to him. And he asked them to put a listing in the paper saying that it would be okay. The police said, "Sure, you'll be perfectly fine." They put it in the paper saying, "You'll be safe. You could do that. We can't trace it back to you." And the bumbling fool believed him. The next letter was on January 25th, 2005, when he sent directions to KAK TV telling them where to look. At that location was another cereal box, and inside was a Barbie doll with a rope around its neck and tied to a pipe, simulating Josephine Otero. On February 3rd, a postcard came to KAK saying that he would send them a floppy disk. 13 days later, the disk was received. The police opened it up, looked at it, and easily traced it back to the Christ Lutheran Church under the name Dennis. Well, they just looked up the Christ Lutheran Church's directory and saw that they had a president, Dennis Rader. That was pretty clean and simple. They didn't arrest him right away, but they approached his daughter Carrie and asked her for a DNA sample, saying it was for medical records. She thought nothing of it and gave her DNA sample. They matched it to the semen found at all the different past crimes. They had finally found their killer. They found BTK. After 30 years, they could finally have some closure. On February 25th, they surrounded Rader's car after lunch and arrested him. Once in the interrogation room, he would not talk, but then quickly turned around, opened up, and started talking nonstop. He gave 30 hours worth of confessions. He talked about all of his killings and went into great detail about it. Of course, soon after this, Paula Dietz divorced him in an emergency proceeding. The rest of the family and friends were devastated by his arrest and couldn't even believe that it was him. She was smart and just split town. On July 27th, 2005, the trial began. The family members of each victim was able to speak. None of it fazed him, though. He didn't seem to care. He was just there. And when he had to give details about each of his crimes, there were times that he was just sighing as he's telling it, talking nonchalant about it, like it really didn't matter. You're a real psycho. After everything, he was able to talk, which, he got to say something at the end of the trial, and he spoke for 30 minutes, and instead of apologizing, he talked about himself. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He just wanted attention. It's amazing that he was not caught sooner. The way he bumbled through all these crimes. I mean, I can't remember which crime it was, but I remember reading someplace, and I didn't put it in my notes, that he actually left the gun in somebody's house and had to go back and pick it up because he forgot his gun laying on the counter. So he had to go back and pick it up. And I can't remember which one it was that he did that at. On August 18th, 2005, he was sentenced to life in prison and will not be eligible for parole until 2180. Too soon, if you ask me. On the 19th, he was taken to El Dorado Correction Facility in Kansas, which is his new home till 2180. He is in solitary confinement 23 hours a day. Yeah, he's just a sorry. Out of all the crime stories that I have done since I started doing this on YouTube, I really seriously think he's the biggest piece of shit that I've reported on. And I'm sorry for swearing, but he is just a waste of space. There's so much info to go through. I mean, you can find hundreds of pages of information. I tried to stick to the facts and the law enforcement stuff. There are places that you can find all of Rader's accounts of this, but I don't know how much of it's true and how much of it is he's exaggerating and making up in his own messed up mind. And I mean, I did mention a couple things that he said, but I tried to stay away from it. The guy's just crap. So this was a really long one. I'm sorry. Thank you for coming. If you're not subscribed, please do so. I'm so close to 1,000 right now. As always, be good to yourself. Be good to others. Love you all, and I will see you next time for more true crimes.